Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Cult Products podcast. On today's show, we have Ryan Lindley, and Ryan is super interesting because unlike all of the other guests that we've had so far, who've been mainly focused on how do we cut through the noise, speak to CISOs, build trust with them, win them as customers, one of the things in a varied career that Ryan has done is actually being a CISO. So in this episode, we're going to get into a little bit of what it feels like to be marketed to, sold to, and to work as a design partner with cybersecurity startups. So today on the show, we've got Ryan Lindley, all the way from Southern California. Very, very different climate right now to snowy Britain. Great to have you on the show, Ryan. Tell us a little bit about your journey, the story so far. How did you get where you are, and what's your background in cybersecurity?
Yeah, thanks, man. It's great to be here. Well, it all starts back when I was 9. Just kidding. It actually kind of does. I was playing a video game and I went on the internet to look at a walkthrough, and I was just struck with this question about how did thoughts get from someone's head onto the screen in front of me, and just trying to unbake that cake was a thread that I started pulling on, and that's lasted over 30 years now. And so I have a deep passion for cybersecurity. Growing up, I thought hackers were the coolest thing, Mission Impossible, Swordfish, hackers, Angelina Jolie, the whole nine. Whatever the formula was for enchanting like a young nerd, it certainly resulted in me.
You're dreaming one day of being a hacker. What happens next?
So, things progressed. I got involved in peer-to-peer before Napster and LimeWire was a thing. You used to have to be a part of an FXP team, which you had to contribute in some way to, essentially raiding corporate FTP servers and uploading like music and movies and that kind of stuff. And I think I was like 11 when I started scanning IPs for FTP servers. And that a few years later grew into me slaving a drafting lab at the high school, SSHing 30 computers from home and using the school's juicy T3 pipe for similar activities. And, it's funny, through all of this, I didn't yet know that I was going to be a security professional or that I was going to work in that space. They kind of hit me later, when I was doing some IT help desk stuff, and just kind of an inspiration one day, fixing a corrupted printer driver, and I was like, this is really boring, right? Like, this is not a good time. I wonder if I can sell these people some security hours, and do like an evaluation on their infrastructure. And I wasn't at that point traditionally trained at all. It was a long time ago, but that's kind of where things turn the corner.
Mm-hmm. There must be, I think, like a huge gap now, but people who are kind of young and are kind of learning how, computers work and the internet works and all the rest of that kind of stuff, because they don't probably have to go to such extreme lengths now that they've got like Spotify and Netflix and all of those kinds of things. Not that I ever did any of this stuff, but to build out a music collection or any of those kind of things.
I don't think there's a whole lot of people in security that came up with a lifelong passion like I have, who were not at one time fiddling around with something they probably should have been. Hopefully we didn't do material damage to anyone or anything. Most of the time it's just a kid who really likes solving problems, looking for something a little bit more complex to sink its teeth into. And so I have great respect for a lot of the programs I see now that try to take that nascent criminal behavior in the youth and turn it. I think especially in Britain, I've heard about programs that intercede with youth offenders that display like cyber skills, right? I don't know if you're aware of any of that, but yeah, that's something that I've read about.
At this point, you're still, I guess, on the kind of wrong side of the tracks a little bit here, yes, with the hacking stuff, and you don't want to be fixing printers. Where do you end up from that?
I pulled a couple of stunts to gain business that, as decades later, informed action trained professional. I did my CISO at Carnegie Mellon, which is an excellent program. I can't recommend that enough. At that point, I was fully off the dark tracks. I was really just bored with my life.
We might get into what some of the other 2 a.m. Wake ups are later in this chat. But
Sure, yeah.
I mean, just to kind of shuffle through to the end, like you end up doing some pretty big jobs in some pretty big places.
Yeah, I've been blessed with opportunity. There was the main turning point in the just kind of takeoff of my career was centered on mentorship. I found an incredible mentor, and through him, a lot of doors were open for me. Those doors gave me a lot of exposure. I was asked to join the expert network for a large bank that does capital market investing. And so I spent a lot of time in front of capital market investors talking about security technology and spend and trends and things like that. And that exposure led to a number of opportunities to, kind of move out of the formal organization-based CISO role that I was in and consult. And I think with the risk picture changing for corporate CISOs, especially around like the Joe Sullivan thing, Uber, and everything, it was probably the right time to look at making that transition. It all leads back to mentorship. It circles back around to a guy named Malcolm Harkins, who took an interest in me and my career, and really helped open doors.
So you've really done it all. Like you've been you've been hacking people, you've been securing people, you've been the CISO, you've been working as a consultant and advisor with CISOs. Now, when we work with a lot of the founders of quite early stage cybersecurity businesses, a lot of the time what they're really interested in, what we try and encourage them to be interested in, first of all, like who is it that you want to try and speak to? Now, almost everybody will start with heavily regulated industries, because if it's a heavily regulated industry, they're more likely to need to, in some sort of compliance framework, show that they have these security issues covered, which means that we can potentially sell them a product. And increasingly, over the past couple of years, as you alluded to, when we talk about, well, what kind of problems do these people have? One of the things that comes up is, well, if this goes really badly, they could go to jail. You've sat in that heavily regulated space. You've had the potential threat, I guess, the very, very real threat of that coming up. Tell me a little bit about what are the kind of emerging challenges as a CISO that you see beyond just the threat of jail time and prison food?
Yeah, sure. It is a great question, and there's several answers to it. Really, it's still a nascent role. The role of the CISO, and its entry onto the business scene was really within the last couple decades. It hasn't been fully defined yet, and I know there's some notable CEOs that have recently made comments about how unrealistic it is to expect one person to fulfill the entire role of CISO, right? So I think we have yet to see how the structure of the office of the CISO is really defined in the end. I think that's a moving target right now. I mean, especially when you look at things like IT, right? Reporting into a CIO, which is not uncommon, but is demonstrably unwise, and like easily so. But there's the kind of the concept that because security is often bolted onto IT fixtures, it then necessarily should report into IT. When in fact, like we're going to be evaluating and reporting on failures of the IT team, and of the infrastructure team. So reporting into them, a bit of a conflict of interest, right? So I think that understanding where the company is willing to invest in you and whether that fits your personal risk picture for potential outcomes, right? If a company is not willing to even talk about things like directors and officers insurance, prepaid or prearranged severance agreements, things of that nature. I mean, I think that signals a lack of trust, oftentimes in the role or the value of the office of the CISO. So I think that is going to change. And I can't imagine there are a whole lot of people out there contraindicative to me who are thrilled about what's happened with the liability picture for a CISO. So all of those things I think are factors. And even with the CISO job market is kind of in the toilet, has been for a while. I think there are still people walking away from it, because why would you want to have that little peace of mind with that much liability?
It sounds, I don't want to paraphrase too much, but it sounds like ambiguity is is a big issue here. Like this isn't a role like a CFO where it's like, okay, I know what a CFO is, I know who a CFO is, I know what to like measure them on, all of those kinds of things. This is something that is, it's you're kind of building the plane in flight. That ambiguity, certainly from like a lot of the conversations that I've had, can lead to a lot of tension. Whether that's tension, kind of upwards into, like the CEO or whoever on that side, or it's kind of like sideways, like you said, into IT, or it's things like R&D saying, well, don't slow me down here, or engineers saying, I just need to be like shipping stuff, and this is kind of getting in the way of this. Those two, like, I feel like that tension combined with the ambiguity just exacerbates everything and makes the life of the CISO stressful.
It does.
Is that fair?
It's very fair. And my approach to kind of combating some of that has really been to focus on culture. Especially in organizations where there are information silos. What I found anecdotally is that there are a few organizations at the SMB or even enterprise level that don't have inherent security talent in each of their business disciplines, right? All engineers like to hack stuff. So what you usually find is a collection of people who are very aware of the risks, the primary risks within their personal working environment, and no cohesive program to stitch that all together. And so building culture, it builds influence on its own, but it's the foundation for getting rid of some of that tension, right? When you can create partnerships and develop security champions in important business silos and turn the culture, the mentality from security is friction to, participating in this helps accelerate business velocity. And like, hopefully it's fun. I like to create competitions between teams, and sometimes we do capture the flags or, whatever it may be. But having that culture that's security first, security minded, people are thinking about it. They're happy. They're proud to report when they see something different, that is, it's self-healing wounds, right? That's if you can inspire the right culture.
How do you make that real? So, without kind of getting, I guess, too abstract, talking about kind of security first. If you're a CISO and you're in that situation where you're like, I can feel the tension, I can feel the ambiguity, like how do you change the culture? How do you bring people along with you on that kind of journey? Like, can a CISO even do that independent of anyone else?
Yes, absolutely. Why not? And I think one of the defining metrics of a CISO success is their ability to build influence, right? And that's one of the things that's not on the paperwork, not directly. And for a lot of people, it's a surprise how much of the role really is focused on that. But it does require people skills. And there is a certain element of being able to read both the room and the individual. I usually look for a chink in the armor. I look for someone who's asking questions about hackery stuff. I don't really know how to be more specific than that, but there's a certain kind of inquisitiveness in a certain minded individual that often signals a desire to learn or know more. And oftentimes you can kind of see other people who think what you think is cool. That's the person I usually start with, right? And then I go to individual business units and I look at who is the tacit leader in the room. Who is the engineer that the other engineers look to, regardless of, head engineer role, name, title, anything like that? Where do people go to validate their thoughts and ideas? And I'll start with that person. I'm very big into honesty. So the conversation with someone like that would probably start off really bluntly, being like, hey, I'm trying to change the security culture here at this organization. You seem like you're respected among your peers. I'd really love to have a conversation about how we could partner and help things accelerate, And usually I find people willing when you approach them on a really genuine basis like that, to play ball to the extent that they're able. When they know that you're not just going to namelessly throw control friction at them, that you are going to consider their needs and their wants and their bandwidth and availability and try to fold that into the overall strategy. People want to feel heard,
I guess nobody's saying that like security isn't important. But I think it's just like, what are the incentives that people have? Because if you're an engineer and your main incentive is like, well, how much stuff can you ship? And you're saying, we want to put in friction that's going to mean that you can ship, less stuff or stuff less quickly. Like that's a tough trade-off. And I mean, like, does that always have to be a trade-off? Is it okay, is it realistic to go on? Why not?
So yeah, it really depends on the organization you're at, and in that funny in cybersecurity, it depends, right? But real quickly, and I probably should have given you the synopsis at the beginning of the episode, but I have worked, from help desk support all the way up through the executive level. I've led and built security organizations or security programs at organizations with everything from SMB to physical infrastructure, 33 colos in 11 different countries. It's a data center provider. A lot of startup, cloud native software development companies, agile, break fast, move fast kind of organizations. I've worked with Fortune 500 organizations, trying to make a transition from hardware manufacturing to the cloud. So I've seen a lot of different kinds of organizational and institutional friction, right? Is the point that I'm making. And specifically with engineers, right? Because software development is kind of my bread and butter. The startup cultures where I really established myself and made my name and feel very at home in that space, obviously. But within that space specifically, the perception of friction usually has to do with an assumption that there's no understanding of what your function is. And then additionally, engineers don't like context switching, right? So if they believe that I know nothing about their function, and they believe that all I'm going to do is institute controls and throw tools at them that require them to context switch in order to develop, why wouldn't they naturally see me as, like an enemy or an adversarial context? So I do my best to make sure it's understood that your pain points are heard. They're considered. These are the things that we talked about and how I modified the plan to help accommodate for your, whatever it may be. But also spend time just with the people. You have to you have to spend, especially in this remote first culture, right? And almost all of the work I do is remote, but I won't hesitate to get on a plane and fly to a client. It's never been. I enjoy it. But if you don't spend that time, and not just time on your objectives, but time on theirs, and kind of agnostic to the organization, I think that's what really inspires buy-in, is the perception of like interest, right, in a person and in their success.
So what I find really interesting about what you just said is there's kind of two things that politely, like, you may not necessarily put together, because you like, we're kind of talking about what makes a good CISO here, and I know that, like, again, going back to the like ambiguity, and this is like an emerging thing, is like lots of different types of people have ended up in those positions. Like it's not like a defined career track necessarily.
Right. And I think that that's a rare combination of skill sets, and I think that most of the people I've seen be very successful in this capacity have both, and again, I was very blessed to, the other half of my experience has been in like sales and business development. So soft skills have been a focus or a requirement to pay the bills since I was 18. I moved out when I was 17. I graduated from the military academy. That was the culmination of my little stunt taking over the drafting lab, by the way. I got sent to the military academy, graduated valedictorian. Right. It was a great experience, but it was rough.
We constantly working with founders, constantly talking about, what is the value proposition of their product and all of those kinds of things. I think it is something that a lot of those founders are very sensitive to themselves, which is that, like, one of the biggest challenges that CISOs who they want to be buying their product have is that kind of tension in the ecosystem around them. And I think this is probably because a lot of the people that we work with themselves come from a software engineering background. We hear a lot of stuff like, we don't add another tool into somebody's workflow. Really, we just like want this to be like red squiggly lines that comes up when they're like coding, or it's
integrated into the IDE.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. I mean, integrating the IDE, I guess, like, at risk of kind of being somewhat of a buzzword. Do you have a sense of, like, what is it that, if you were designing the perfect product for a CISO, and I know this is difficult because it could be any number of things,
like with the intention of being helpful to them in their organization, reducing that tension, like making it easy for the organization's culture to change, to improve security. Like, what are the kind of things that you would look out for and say, yeah, okay, that is interesting to me on that front?
I think having a control surface, like a control plane or an admin plane for your entire governance stack, right? And that's everything from policies and procedures, documentation, to actual generation of evidence for compliance pushes and things of that nature. I know that as a CISO building security programs, that was one of the first major level ups, to having a way to organize effectively and digitally, things like a risk register, updating it, doing third-party compliance and all that. But it also really, helped to open my eyes to some of the things that were fundamentally broken, that are still fundamentally broken largely in the industry at that level. And it really is kind of that realization in that work that was the inspiration for some of the stuff that I've been working on with AI and Aegis. Yeah.
Interesting. Maybe tell me a little bit more about that.
So it's one of my favorite whipping posts, you know what I mean? Is cyber liability insurance and the process of evaluation and assessment. And most compliance, at least low-level compliance certifications or reports, right? SOC, PCI. I always kind of jokingly said that the only people who could fail an audit are like really honest people. Because the barrier for most artifacts for proof of control and things like that in an audit scenario is a screenshot with a time clock in it somewhere. And that's what we're willing to base the whole thing on. And I like to complain about that for a long time until I realized, when you ascend to the leadership level and you're building programs for impactful organizations, it is actually kind of your responsibility to try to make things better as well, right? If all you do is participate at a complaining level, then you're not really a part of the solution, are you? And there's I had a dinner conversation one night with a really brilliant guy named John. He kind of started the DevOps culture in America. He wrote the DevOps handbook in conjunction with a couple other people. I met him through my expert network engagement with Mosaic KeyBank. He threw out this idea of having digitally signed evidence for insurance for liability and compliance pushes, and it just kind of clicked a light bulb on in my head. And this was several years ago, before ChatGPT and the other large language models and the functionality that we see in some of the fine-tuning capabilities we have offline were really as polished as they are now. So the intersection of those two technologies wasn't really forecasted in this idea, but the value is I feel like the value proposition is pretty obvious, right? And that's where I've been focusing. So long-winded answer, right? Bespoke institutional LLM models that are fine-tuned and trained on actual business intelligence to derive answers to the governance stack questions, right? The policies we develop, the procedures we develop. So I'm going on and on here, which I apologize, but there's one of the things that I saw coming into a lot of organizations to stitch together a cohesive program out of a lot of functional units was that it was really common for an organization who needed PCI or who needed a SOC report to hire a third-party cybersecurity firm who came in and wrote these amazing policies, right? Like fantastic policy stack documentation, but it tied them to a lot of frameworks and procedures that they did not actually practice, right? And I saw that time and time again. And it's like, well, sure, your SOC 2 assessor is going to be happy to see these words on this paper. But if you have to go prove that you adhere to those standards of data handling, you have neither the headcount nor the practical experience to do so because you've not practiced that skill at all. Like this is completely out of thin air, And so the idea of being able to create governance that's developed directly from business intelligence and how an organization actually operates, as opposed to some window picture of a checklist and it's supported by screenshots with clocks in them.
Yeah. So you were doing that pre-LLM. I guess that's like totally accelerated now. You've got access to all of these different things, and I guess not like the sexiest problem in the world, compliance, all those kinds of things. but like maybe that's the point. If you aren't having to spend hours and hours doing it.
Well, right, yeah. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I know as a technical CISO, oh my Lord, governance is rough, man. GRC, like my hat's off to those professionals because they are consummate professionals and they're handling a work burden that I don't want to touch if I don't have to. It's not sexy. It's not fun. It's not quick. It requires a lot of coordination and a lot of buy-in. And it's exactly the kind of thing that LLMs are really fantastic at, right?
I really liked what you said about the only people that fail and audit are just really honest people. That is something I've heard in various different forms. You know, it's like if you ask somebody to prove something, like generally they can kind of find a way of proving it to a sufficient level to get through an audit. What you're describing sounds like, well, aside from the fact that you have to actually tick the box to move through the compliance process, this is actually like making that whole governance process actually much more useful to an organization.
Right. And providing contextually relevant, bespoke guidance that's based upon actual operations instead of a concept of how things should be. Auditors and insurance companies are performing required functions, right? But they are also necessarily reactive. And large organizations that move around a lot of capital in that manner often end up fairly bureaucratic, especially their heavily regulated space. You know, and the result is a lot of times you're being assessed by a checklist that's full of controls or requests for evidence artifacts that aren't relevant to your organization in any way because you operate differently. The way you operate is far more secure than the standard best practices when this checklist was developed. And now your job is actually translation. You have to translate your infrastructure, your operations, your controls into a language that the auditor can understand. And boy, wouldn't it be helpful if there was someone who could take 3 or 4 different stabs at that and provide you a talking point sheet, you know, based on how things actually work in your organization. And the second layer of benefit there, sorry to kind of steamroll there, but it's also getting a real world look at where you're not meeting standards, right? Where is your organization falling short on the control plane from providing, you know, being able to provide evidence that will actually have them certified or pass an audit?
I guess this one things that just as we were talking about this made me think was, you know, again, like a lot of the time we're talking about products and, you know, how these products can use AI to make that product better. There's also just like, I guess, how are CISOs' roles changing because of AI, which, you know, that feels like what we've just talked about around compliance.
So I think whether we like it or not, we became the Department of AI. Congratulations, CISOs, you inherited that. And it's going to be a responsibility that we cannot abdicate for some time. I hate to be pessimistic because I really don't like operating off that foot, but I think some people there's going to be some precedent-setting examples of people falling on their face, you know, with expecting security to broaden its context to driving all of that as well. However, you're also compelled by professional integrity, almost required, I would say, to become proficient, to become knowledgeable, to at least become colloquial with your understanding of the technology, how it's used and how it's secured and what the potential risks are, right? And that comes along with the job. You know, I do a lot of mentorship. I think it's important to give that back.
I think we were just into like, you know, where should CISOs be right now with AI?
One of the things that I commonly tell people that I'm mentoring who have a desire to get into the field or ascend the level that they're at, typically in engineering to like, you know, either an SME architect or a leadership role, we have to be held to a higher standard, especially as leadership professionals in security, because there's a greater burden of trust placed upon us, right? And that's why it's a responsibility to become proficient. It's not, you know, it's not optional. AI is integrated into so many aspects of business now, from development, vibe coding, you know, all the way through the business stack to business intelligence, analytics, marketing. A refusal to become proficient or understand the inherent risks involving LLMs in your workflow, and not just from like what happens if an engineer accidentally discloses a token or some kind of access secret to a model that's vulnerable to prompt injection. It's also, for example, in California, companies are held to the CIS standards as proof that they're taking reasonable measures to secure customer data. If you integrate a black box AI product into a critical business flow and you can't stand in front of a judge and explain how the decisions that your company made were arrived at, I would say that you fail to meet that burden. So, there's downstream liability considerations that are important as well. And that's something that you have to become informed on. And again, all of this is moving at such rapid speed. So one of the things that I tell my mentees is, if you are not passionate about this, don't do it. This is not the job for you. And frankly, CISO's job kind of sucks. I don't know that it's a job I would just fully 100% recommend for anyone who wasn't crazy enough to just be passionate about it and need to be involved. There's a protector's ethos, right? That I think a lot of us represent. Certainly in my life, I've been that figure for just about everyone that I've been involved with. Certainly my two little girls, but that role of protector comes with a mindset of facing and transferring or mitigating or controlling risk. So if you're not passionate about the industry, if you don't love cybersecurity, if you're not building labs in your spare time, if you're not tied into podcasts and newsletters and all those things, you're probably not going to be able to keep up. It requires some sort of inborn compulsion or desire or passion to be involved to keep up with the rate of progress now. So if you're not bought in, I would say get out, because it's not worth the stress. Hopefully, we're also able to create a demonstrable impact to the bottom line through reducing friction, accelerating business velocity. That should ultimately be a CISO's first goal, right? Goal number one, preservation of human life, right? Wherever that intersects with your job functions. And then goal number two is business objectives, right? And unfortunately, this is not an ideal world where our primary directive is the best security possible or the right controls for this environment. That's not what it is. What it is understanding the business objectives and how we can provide support to help facilitate better, more economical outcomes at a higher velocity, right? And where risk is present, sometimes there's also risk acceptance present. It really just depends on what your organization looks like. But focusing on that, I think, tends to bring the most personal success for institutional CISOs that I've been involved with.
Who do you think is doing a good job right now in that product space of actually addressing the real problems that CISOs are facing and really helping beyond just being another tool, but somebody who's got that whole user-centric, CISO-centric thing down really well and is beloved by the CISO community?
That last part makes it almost impossible to fulfill.
We can go one step back if you want.
I think it's a bit of a unicorn, right? There are people who are making genuine, heartfelt stabs at it. I would say, okay, so let me plug a friend of mine, and his technology, I think, was a great example of this. There's been a shift in the industry of moving towards the browser as the formal point of control for a lot of security controls and enforcement, which makes perfect sense because that's where the vast majority of incidents occur, where vulnerabilities are exploited, et cetera. And so actually now we're seeing a whole new product category of enterprise browsers that are starting to hit the market and so forth. And I don't have as much direct experience with them, but I know that Dope Security is an example of a vendor who took Secure Web Gateway, which traditionally has been a great product, but not really deployable or administratable without some level of either professional services involvement or like a deeply trained local professional that's has vendor specific knowledge and so forth. Dope Security created a secure web gateway that was built into the browser that has a local agent for analysis of everything that's going on. It gets sent back, but the analysis is done client side. The thing that really stood out as a differentiator, you could launch a 30-day POC of this product from their website in 5 minutes without ever talking to anyone. And and it was organization wide and it was effective, right? You would enter, whatever set of credentials you had to integrate with either your Active Directory or Google Workspace or anything like that. And within, 10 or 15 minutes, you had a dashboard that actually gave you a visualization of shadow IT of apps that are used that aren't within organizational SSO boundaries and things that are controlled surfaces. Because the root cert, is replaced, and all even encrypted traffic that transits the browser now is open to inspection. It was just so elegant and it's so incredibly helpful. I was at the time the CISO for a portfolio of private equity owned software development companies, and they were offshoring or nearshoring customer support operations. And Dope Security's, secure web gateway solution was how I was able to secure the entire Jamaica operation to a point where we were comfortable that no American information was ever going to be exposed.
That idea of, one of the differentiators we have as a product is we can connect really, really easily, and we can kind of spin up usually something that like has read-only permissions, that rather than I think stuff is actually making changes. Just from like knowing people in bigger organizations that I've worked with who've been in charge of IT and the different products that we use, I was a bit like, well, yeah, but I mean, would you just do that if you were like, oh, this is a cool website, and I can create an account, and then I can ingest all this data, and I can do like a trial of this thing. It's not really the same as me saying, like, here's a cool video generator thing. I think I'll give this a go for like 5 minutes on my laptop. Like, how compelling is that as a proposition to a CISO, that connect quickly, try it in read-only mode? How realistic is that?
So it's not, I believe the POC is not read-only. It really just depends on your use case, right? If you're a large global enterprise, multiple billions of dollars, publicly traded, Fortune, whatever, probably not the way you want to trial or deploy a solution, right? And of course, you can get as involved as you want with sales engineers and things of that nature. But, targeted rollout, sure, right? Like your internal IT team or the direct people within your focus, if you have the proper organizational sponsor, and it's within your purview, I think is a great place to start with something like that. It's because it gives you fine-grained granular control of being able to restrict the scope of what's accessed almost universally with the way that we now leverage web apps over, local applications and so forth. There are very few use cases outside of that context that can't be controlled. And so the reduction in attack surface is massive. The potential of reduction in attack surface is massive. I have not seen a lot of tools that are that intuitive to administrate or that easy to roll out in an effective context. And I know firsthand that, that's my experience. It's anecdotal. But it was immensely positive. And I remember walking away thinking like, this is really just how products should work. It shouldn't be a 3-week lead in to a POC and trial with 4 different meetings from, this, that, and the other, unless you're engaging in a design partnership, right? And that's a different proposition.
I'm all for lowering friction and making things as easy as possible, for sure. So it's good to hear that is an attractive thing. But I guess it's always going to be slightly different. I'd be interested to know, from your perspective, like, when has that kind of relationship worked well for you, and why does it work so well for you?
I think wherever you have the bandwidth to lend valid assessment and actual engineering context to a product that's going to directly impact your ability to produce positive outcomes for the business, right? In the private equity world, in the background and public records searching space, that was with companies that handled identity resolution, right? Fidelity of identity resolution, fraud scoring metrics, because obviously background checking is a place that's ripe for information abuse, people who are attempting to steal identities and stuff of that nature. So not only recognizing patterns in that type of behavior, but also developing holistic fraud scoring mechanisms that were valid and provable through large context. So engaging those design partnerships gave us a voice, on behalf of the American people and their private and their sensitive information to impact a system that's, or an ecosystem that's being relied on by myriad enterprise organizations at every level now. Like people's fraud scoring metrics, CIF Science, those brought unbelievable value to the engineering team, the engineering teams where we were there. And then on kind of the other side of the equation, one thing I learned as a founder is that it's your success is often far less predicated on your idea of what solving the problem is than it is on market feedback, right? You need to spend a lot of time with your customers, especially at the beginning, really talking to them about their pain points, their experience using the platform, whether or not it met their expectations and what needs to be changed. That direct first level customer interaction and feedback loop, and hopefully a good customer advisory board can supply insights that are so much more valuable than anything that's probably going to come out of my brain, right? In terms of the relevance. And that's a function that I couldn't replicate anywhere else,
Do you have any tips for, I guess, firstly, founders who are actually looking for design partners?
I mean, design partnerships are, it can kind of be a broad term, right? But I think especially where there is a organic and natural feeling fit, product client fit. When you're a fraud scoring, mass people, data leverager, looking at the largest provider of public record search documents or artifacts in the country, that the marriage there is so natural that value is derived on both sides in almost every meeting or interaction that we have with one another. So I think look for that really good fit. I think as a founder, there's always one or two organizations you have in your head, whether they be real or ideas of an organization that that's your customer. That person is the person. There's not going to be a whole lot of friction. You're going to provide value that actually exceeds their expectations, does have a bottom line impact to the business. Whatever your concept of that is, the closest thing you have to that conversationally, even if it's an organization you feel that you're never going to be able to go after, a business you think you're not going to win, a lot of times those people are still willing to get involved in design partnerships where value is present on both sides of the equation, right? So if your product or your value proposition, your service is of value to an organization, I think those conversations are a lot easier to have than people assume they would be. You just really got to be direct, And don't hide a sales hook in there anywhere. Be genuine with organizations, genuine and transparent about your pricing and your intentions. The thing that will turn organizations off quicker than anything else, at least, as in my leadership experience, getting lured into a meeting on false pretenses and then getting sold to. You know what I mean? I will never talk to you again. You'll never, ever get through my phone. I might even put your domain on the corporate block list for every organization that I'm involved with. It's like you're the wrong person. Don't do that. Be genuine. I also think it's our responsibility to listen and be educated about the market, the tools available, and the vendors that are doing it and how they're doing business. So you should give those people some time. But the conversation needs to be honest.
I guess that leads us on to, kind of one last thing really, which is when you are being sold to, what is it that you find annoying? What is it that you find you wish people selling you products wouldn't do? And then let's end on a positive note. What are the good guys doing?
Yeah. So I understand. I've been in sales. I get it. The instinct, the hunt, the need to try to produce more business. I'm sensitive to that. That's a difficult struggle. Sales is hard. That's why it's lucrative for those who are successful at it. That being said, if you're going to take the time to get all the way to a decision maker, right? And that's, me or someone else at an organization with signing authority, purchasing authority for onboarding tools and things of that nature. Why would you then waste the capital that you've developed in getting there by sending drip campaigns with pre-canned messages and, ambulance chasing? I've had everything from, you have the conversation stack in your inbox and it says there's like 6 messages. And on the 7th message, right? And I've ignored you this whole time because I don't take cold calls. I'm not, I rarely do that. I get like a catty or a sarcastic or an angry message. Hey, listen, ma'am, I'm sensitive to your struggle. I really am. But if you had started with the catty personal message, you and I probably would have had a dialogue. It was the 6 preceded canned messages on a drip campaign every 2 weeks that turned me off. And now your attitude just looks distasteful. So that, and then I've had, actually had a BDR DM me on LinkedIn that he had donated to a GoFundMe campaign for a close personal friend of mine that had passed away as a means of trying to get my attention. And, I really kind of let that guy have it. I was like, this is the most egregious overstep of, professional boundaries that I've experienced maybe ever, but certainly in a very long time. And I'm disappointed in you for your organization.
That is a new look, I think. I don't think I've heard anything like that before.
Yeah, so it's rough out there. On the flip side, have a conversation with me about what my life is like. I remember particularly there was one lady, and I'm sorry that I can't remember your name. She was very bright. We were at RSA in San Francisco. A cab pulled up. She asked if I wanted to share the cab with her. We were both going to Moscone Center. I was like, yeah, sure. Hopped in. She and I had a good conversation. It didn't really get back around to security until almost the last 2 minutes of the drive when she started asking about how my organization assesses risk and like that kind of stuff. She worked for Security Scorecard, right? The way that she approached the situation conversationally in a friendly manner, getting to know me, finding out what some of my pain points were before just throwing her product at me. It inspired a lot of trust. And that person was someone that I gave my card and my name to, and I saved their number. It's in my phone under something security court card. Again, sorry for not remembering the name, but I told her, I think it was Lydia. I told her, when my organization assesses or evaluates technology of this nature, I will call you first, and that's not the answer that sales professionals are looking for, because it's not an immediate return. But the true answer is build relationships, especially with people at the decision-making level. Invest some time, but build the relationship, because you want to make a lasting impression. Because I'm never going to pick up a cold call and buy a $500,000 security technology, ever. I will be going to my network first, and the people who I know that are established in those spaces that have demonstrated integrity and character. So I think you just kind of have to be genuine and learn how to network and learn how to get involved in conversations, be interesting, be able to talk about things that are relevant to security professionals, ask questions and listen. It's a hugely underrated human skill, is the ability to actually listen to someone's answers. But when you master that one, it inspires a lot of positive influence. So
I feel like that's the thing that connects a lot of the themes that we've spoken about today is, back to kind of sensitivity, listening, empathy, technical problems often have people-based answers somewhere within that. So I think that's great. And I guess, to kind of bring things to a close, the other theme that has come up, and you've mentioned this a lot, has been about mentorship. And
first of all, don't give up. It's not easy breaking in, and there's a lot of misrepresentation of requirements. I think the LinkedIn ecosphere for security is so massively valuable. You need to get involved if you're not. But then there's also a lot of conversation that distracts and confuses. And there seems to be this favorite question that people bandy about over whether you have to have technical experience to be successful in cybersecurity. Duh. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, that's not the happy hold hand answers for everyone. But even if you focus on GRC, you aren't necessarily creating governance around technical products, technical workflows, and technical outcomes, technical controls. If you're not familiar with the lexicon, if you don't understand technology, it's probably not a fit. And the reason that mentorship is so critical is because our space is specialized. You have to be almost a fully fledged discipline in 3 or 4 different engineers in order to get looked at for an entry-level role. So entry-level in cybersecurity is not entry-level. People need to accept that. The way to offset that, one of the only tools we have, I think, as leaders in this space today, is through mentorship, is through direct interaction with that generation coming up and opening doors for the people who demonstrate the kind of effort that's deserving and willing, right? you just have to get involved. You have to be involved in the conversation. If you like podcasts, listen to a podcast. If you hear an episode where someone says something you really like, reach out to them on LinkedIn. Message them. Tell them you really loved their conversation about such and that's on, whatever podcast. Do you have 10 minutes for me to talk with you sometime about how you got where you're at? I'm trying to do the same thing. I did a lot of that when I was ascending from the SME kind of architect level into leadership. And that's how I found my mentor, who, was my career went like, it was going like this, then it just went straight up, because of the doors he was able to open for me. But you have to be involved and you have to demonstrate willingness, right? Like you have to be, people like to help people who are willing to help themselves. So be willing, and I haven't yet met a senior experienced individual in this space who doesn't respond positively to that kind of engagement.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of people. Like if somebody is genuinely, prepared to invest in themselves, and just wants a bit of help, I'm always very aware that I had that, from other people, and like I'm a big believer in karma, and I think paying that stuff back is super important. On that note, how can people get in touch with you? What are your and now's your chance. You've been grilled. Now you can plug whatever you
Yeah. So right now, LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me, Ryan Lindley. It's rlindley-cybersec, I think, is the link there. But just go search my name. The only big bald guy with a beard. Ryan at aegis.ceo. If you want to email me directly. The call is open also for mentorship if you're younger, nascent in your career, or even if you're, a fairly developed professional and you just like some advice, guidance on how to develop things and move forward. I always have time for that. I'll make time for that. In the end, I think it's really about, like you said, a lot of it is kind of sensitivity, but it's about understanding needs. When you build teams that are informed and you inspire people to believe that you're tied to their development and their success, agnostic of a specific organization, but just as a professional and as a human, I found that you can develop teams that'll come back and, deliver kills for you. Like they're wounded on the battlefield, still dragging people over the finish line. And I've been blessed to work with some amazing talent that, delivered those kinds of wins for me. And my career has been built on the back of that. And I'm very, very grateful for it, and I think that's why I'm so involved in the servant leadership mentality and investment in others, because you can't be everywhere all the time. And so the people that are there with you, it's, you want them to be good, right? You want them to be loyal. You want them to be inspired to produce outcomes for you. So, look at me up on LinkedIn. I'll have the website link up there soon. It's not done. It's been in development for a little bit, but reach out to me directly.
Cool. Ryan, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you today, and so much gold there and everything that you said. Really appreciate you coming on the show, and it's been great to connect with you.
Yeah, thank you, Phill. It's been wonderful to be here. Told you I can talk. I like to talk. So, I love doing podcasts. I love doing stuff like this. I love getting involved. Thanks so much for having me.
Cult Products is brought to you by Yaya, helping cybersecurity companies define who they're for, what they do, and how they're different. To learn more, visit yaya.co. And don't forget to search for Cult Products in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Follow the show so you never miss an episode. On behalf of the team at Yaya, thanks for listening.